Hey, we are live.
All right.
Howdy.
This is Genesis Office Hours Beach Press edition, and coming to you live from about an hour, 2 hours away from Portland on the coast of Oregon, and it's awesome. And it's like WordCamp on steroids. But since I've got a captive guest audience, I've got Mr. Chris Lema on the end and Andrew Norcross sitting next to me. Guys, want to introduce yourself? Start with you.
My name is Andrew Norcross. I'm the co-founder and lead developer of Reactive Studios, which, in addition to other items, creates the Genesis Design Palette Pro, which is available for all of y'all using Genesis, with some big news for that coming out pretty soon. Beyond that, I am just a WordPress junkie, and I write a lot of code.
Sweet.
My name's Chris Lema, and basically I blog over at a site called chrislema.com. I like WordPress.
All right. And his phone number, we're going to be giving that out later for anyone that wants to directly get in touch. Yeah, so there's a welcome to everyone who's joining us in the chat room today for Genesis Office Hours. A couple ways you can participate. If you head over to carriedills.com/GOH, you can watch the video stream live from there, and then there's also a link to chatroll.com/Genesis-Office-Hours, where you can get in the chat and submit your questions to Norcross and to Mr. Lema. In the past, I've actually referenced both of these guys quite a bit, and if you've ever read Chris Lema's blog, then you know that he writes a lot about business consulting, coaching, pricing, membership. So if you have questions around that arena, he's a great person to ask. And then if you wanted to pick the brain of one of the absolute smartest developers I know, then direct your most hardest WordPress and Genesis questions to Norcross. And as for me, I'm just moderating.
Wow.
Wow.
Passing the buck.
It's office hours, and she's not doing any office hours.
No, well, let me tell you how this goes.
Are we getting paid for this? We're doing her office hours.
We'll work that out later.
Yeah.
So yesterday, I decided that it's a great idea to go jump in the ocean. And mind you, that water is
Cold.
And peer pressure, I don't know, it just sounded like a good idea. Well, I forgot.
It was after the brewery tour.
Yes, it was after a brewery tour, so there might have been a little influence happening. But I forgot to take my glasses off before I dove headlong into the waves. And when I came out, I had no spectacles. So I made a contribution to the sea gods, and from here on out, y'all are just kind of blurry. So I'm not seeing questions in the chat room. It could be that, let me do a little refresh.
No, nobody has any questions for us.
Yes, it is awful video. We are on quite limited Wi-Fi, so apologize for that.
Go to your Google Hangout video and change the...
Still bandwidth change? Should we go up or down?
Yeah, go down a bit.
Boop. Okay.
See if that helps. I don't know if it will.
All right, we're going to try that out. Let's see. That's why it's... Yes, that's why it's blurry, Jamie. That's because I'm not wearing glasses. All right.
We want you all to experience what Carrie's experiencing right now.
Now you see the world the way she is.
Yeah. Tom, you're asking about the chat roll archive, and it's not available to my, like, as an admin, I can get in and see the archives, but you can't really scroll back much in history, which makes me irritated with chat roll. And I used it last week because Talk.io was down, but I'll probably be looking for a different chat solution moving forward. Let's see. Okay, so Norcross, you've got things in the works, but you can't tell us about them yet?
I can go into a little bit. One of the changes that we've got coming with Design Palette is currently the way it's set up is for child themes, there are small add-on plugins that tailor all the settings and defaults to that child theme. And those were all individual pieces that you would have to either purchase in a large package or buy individually, install as another plugin, blah, 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 extra steps. They are now going to be bundled in the core plugin, As new ones are released, they are going to simply be added to the core plugin. So we wrote a little post on it on the site, but essentially, regardless of the license that you purchase, you will get access to all the child themes as they become available. The other part to go along with that is we are ramping up production on that. We are shooting to have them all done by July 30th. Initially, we had a longer timeline as we worked in other stuff, client work, so on and so forth, but we are kind of shifting resources to get them all done, or at least all the 2.0 ones. On the site, there's a list of all the ones we're going to do, and those should be out by July 30, which will essentially give it full coverage of all the Genesis, all the Studio Press 2.0 themes that are available for sale. And then as they make new ones, we will have the add-ons available. We've got kind of a handshake agreement with them that they will give us as early access to the themes as possible. They need to be done because otherwise we build something and then they change it. So we can hopefully have those ready, if not at release, very, very shortly thereafter.
And if you're not familiar with Genesis Design Palette, it's basically an editor in your WordPress dashboard that shows you a little iframe of your site, and you can swap out colors, fonts, background colors, all kinds of ways that you can manipulate the design without writing a single line of CSS. So it's quite beautiful. And then Chris, I know you've got some new things happening at chrislema.com. Is that shareable?
Yeah, they're actually not going to be at chrislema.com. So that's the big news, is that I'm going to go from having one site to having 2 or 3. So the one that's interesting, obviously, in relation to folks who are doing Genesis, is one of the new sites will get launched over at Rainmaker, right, on the new Rainmaker platform. So we're doing some work there. It'll be a leadership and management blog and site with some courses and ebooks and stuff. So some of the books that are on chrislema.com, like Dun Dun and Virtual Teams, they make more sense over somewhere else. So I'm going to move and shift that a bit. And then I have another site coming up soon, which is WP Advisor, which is for WordPress folks who are building plugins and themes and how to think about product development from ideation all the way to launch, and a series of 42 videos that will launch here, if I can do it right, sometime in the same timeline as what Norcross is doing for his full plugin. So should be I'm hoping for mid-July to get it all launched.
I've got to get on the stick, so I have something fun to launch
in July. Yeah.
About the same time.
Just slacking.
Yeah, so all right, we've got a question for Norcross. Any intent to include other theme shop designs for GDP?
Not initially, in part because we would need to get a better handle on how their process works, how much they are deviating from core Genesis. I know some of them follow it pretty well. Some get pretty wild in terms of the markup they add. How just they go so far custom that trying to bend Design Palette to match what they do is almost equivalent to building a whole nother plugin. That combined with we obviously it's Studio Press is on board with what we're doing. I don't know these other developers. Then we don't know what their take on it, if they're open to it, if they feel we'd be stepping on toes, stuff like that. I mean, that being said, it's built in such a way that there's nothing preventing any Genesis theme developer from baking in support for the plugin in their own themes. Once we get this build out done, we plan on writing up a lot more and more thorough documentation and tutorials about how to leverage it in your own stuff. So if you're doing Genesis theme development, instead of having to spend all this time to build your own settings page or trying to hack around the customizer, you can just add support for it, and then folks that want that, they can do their own thing.
And I think more plugin developers, right, ought to be thinking this way, right? Because what you're basically saying is, look, I built not only the plugin but the framework so that if you're building a theme, of course, one of your objectives is to let your customers be able to use it effectively. And so if they don't like the fact that you only gave them in your preset thing 3 colors, why make them go through the child style sheet to go in and start writing code when you can just hook right into Design Palette Pro and just set it up so that the settings are there, right? And then people just pick colors and they move on. So if you're a child theme developer of Genesis, and I'm not calling you out, Rebecca Gill or anybody else.
Hashtag call out.
Hashtag Web Savvy Marketing. But you have all these beautiful, gorgeous, amazing themes, and it's anyone else, right? You have these themes and you run your own stores, whatever. It's a little bit of work, but once you hook into Design Palette Pro, it becomes kind of a default for how regular end users can manipulate the look, the color scheme, the fonts, whatever, of the theme without calling you back, right? I mean, just remove all that support burden.
Yeah, it's basically putting me out of business as a theme customizer.
No, because
Thank God you're also a theme developer, right? Not just a customizer.
Yeah,
Thank you.
One of the subtle benefits of that is because the way the plugin works, it stores the values, it writes its own CSS file, and it saves it in the uploads folder. It never touches the actual child theme, which means if you have your child theme set up to receive updates, part of the problem would be if they'd modified files and they run the updates, they've now lost their modifications.
Right.
If they're using the plugin, they can update the theme and they never lose. Just like you can update Core Genesis and it doesn't mess up your child theme because you're not touching Core Genesis files. Same idea. You don't have to touch the child theme, so you can actually push out bug fixes and updates and things of that nature without have people getting all worried about, oh my God, I lost my new shade of blue.
Beautiful. Well, question from Jan for Andrew. How do you get ideas for your plugins, and when do you decide if it's going to be a plugin versus just write it up as a tutorial? Or...
Most of my ideas actually come from doing client work, and I'll see something that I need to build something for a client, and I look at it and I try to make the decision, is this something that is very much tailored to what they need and it's really not a wider use case? Or is it something where they have a specific implementation, but it would be a wider use case? That's where, heck, my FAQ Manager, the first real plugin I ever built a couple years ago, that was something I built for a client, and I just abstracted it a bit, kind of made it a little more general, and released it. And tutorials, I actually don't write many of them because I'm not very good at teaching, and I'm not good at dealing with the comments of, well, how do I do it this way, or what happens when I do X? I'm not good at that, but I throw a whole lot of code up on GitHub, either plugins that maybe just are really kind of niche kind of stuff that I wouldn't put in the repository. I'll put it up there, or I'll throw it in a gist so it shows how to do something. And I make as much code as I can available because that's how I learn. I learn from other people that have written code from their plugins, and that's one of the ways that I try to give back is I make all of it available for people who want to learn. Here's the code, and make it and go forward, go learn. And but tutorials, it's so much more than just the code. It's walking through the process of how the code is created, why this code is the way it is. Then there's always one person that's like, oh, well, I would do it this way. And I'm like, well, then, I really don't care. You should go write your own tutorial and not bother me. And that little phrase right there is another reason why I don't do a lot of them, is because I'm not the most pleasant person at times. So, but as far as Design Palette, we're going to write up a whole lot of that stuff just so, a lot of other folks can find it useful and build on top of it.
Plus, sometimes he calls his friend and says, do you think I should build a plugin out of this, and how much should I charge?
That too. I'll talk to Chris.
Are you taking on, if a client or if somebody wanted to hire you to create a custom plugin, are you available?
We do Reactive Studios does quite a bit of that. We want to do more plugins than themes. I enjoy plugins way more. So, yes. In short, yes. Long is go to the site, fill out the form, and my fantastic project manager, who she's amazing. She's also my wife, but she kind of she goes through the initial process, finding out how much what are you looking at budget wise, time wise, is what you need something that is really already available, things like that.
Cool. So what I just heard is you're having an affair with your account manager.
Yes, and my project. Hopefully, the project manager doesn't find out.
Hey, secret's safe on the internet, right, guys? Nobody in the chat room's letting this one out. So I know everybody's probably been really annoyed by all of my Beach Press hashtag tweets this week. So if you've unfollowed me, you can just refollow me back next week when all that's done. But there's about 30 of us here, and it's some folks I've met on before, some I just knew online, and some I didn't know at all. But having access to these folks and just kind of like living quite literally in a communal setting for a week is super cool. So, for instance, a couple days ago I was flipping sausage and Norcross was making gravy for biscuits, and I had a question about his WP Backstretch plugin and implementing it on a site, and he just answered it right there. I didn't even have to tweet him or hip chat him. I just looked to the left and said, "Hey, Norcross." And same thing with Chris. I've gotten to pick his brain over cigars and get lots of great information. So, anyways, definitely WordCamps are fantastic, but if you get an opportunity to do one of these smaller, more intimate events, they're definitely great for knowledge share. Okay, going back, all that to say, you've got access to these two guys for the next half hour or so, so get your questions coming on the chat. Let's see. Chris Lema, Woo just dropped their theme prices. Thoughts? And I hadn't seen that. Let's see. Yep. That must have happened like
it was yesterday. 2 days ago.
Okay.
And they dropped their theme price for almost everything, right? I'm pretty sure Canvas stayed the same. Canvas is by far their largest or best-selling theme. But they brought the price down, and this is really the kind of the third step in a series of steps as they're tweaking their theme model, right? So they left the club. So they used to have a recurring revenue monthly club for end users that use their themes as well as for developers, and then they closed out the club and they did a kind of a one price for all their themes for a year. And now they've done the next step, which is to lower some of their individual prices. If you're not looking to buy all of them, you just want to buy one, and it's not Canvas, then the price comes down a bit. So I think they're trying to fine-tune the process and figure out kind of where it makes sense. Mm-hmm. And they've done some surveys, they've interacted with people. But the thing to note, right? I mean, I guess at the end of the day, probably the most interesting thing of all is, according to conversations that both Krogsgaard and I had with them late last year, and it's been echoed early part of this year, 80% of their revenue is coming from WooCommerce and WooCommerce-related extensions. So this is a pretty small thing in the big scheme of Woo themes, because their theme work is just not the same kind of move that they're doing on e-commerce. So, but it's good. I think what we're starting to see is some people starting to talk through what is the value of a theme club, or what is the value of access to a whole set of themes. Obviously, StudioPress has long had the pay one fee and get access to a bunch. Elegant Themes has had it at a much lower price point. And those have really targeted two kinds of audiences, and Woo Themes had been in that play of somewhere in the middle of what kind of audience, and is it someone who's an end user but also wants to tweak it a little bit, which is a little more than what you do with Elegant, but less so than what you could do with Genesis. And so everyone's trying to figure out this new play of you pay once for a year and you get access to a whole bunch. It's just a different recurring model.
Yeah, I really like, the more I think about a subscription-based model for digital products, the more I like it. Because it's just, you sell something for a flat fee, and then you support that same product for years until you fake your death and Go off.
Go off and change it. Well,
Change
see,
the name.
And the thing is, I think almost all of the theme folks really didn't. They in the early years they didn't spend a lot of time killing off products, right? And had they done that, right? So had they said, well, this hasn't gotten a lot of traction, we're going to kill it. This hasn't got a lot, we're going to kill it, right? Is end of life it, right? So not kill it like today it's gone for. But you just say 6 months from now or a year from now we're going to end of life this product. That's classic product management, and we just didn't see it in those theme clubs. We didn't see it in those places where you're like, why would you be covering a theme that, frankly, 6 people downloaded, right? There's no, just close it off. But because we didn't do that, when they finally did say, okay, we're done or we're changing, everything were more dramatic shifts, and that left people feeling a little bit like, oh, this whole thing is crazy. So I think we're growing up a bit in the space.
Cool. I had a question about the Genesis Extender plugin on a multi-site network install. And
I think that would be a good discussion.
Oh, whoops. Sorry, but before, let me back up in the appropriate order. So Mari had a thought on making themes more dynamic on the front end to keep people out of the CSS, but where's the line we cross on bulking up the code or adding too much and potentially watering down the design?
I mean, there's two parts. I mean, obviously, I'm biased because I built something to do that, but there's two parts of that question. One is bulking up the code, and if it's done properly, the only bulk, so to speak, is on the back end. You know, on ours, again, the front end, the only thing that it adds is a single CSS file, and heck, you know, Jetpack adds 14 CSS files. 1, 14, you know, whatever the case may be.
You have options.
Yeah,
People like options.
and it runs it through CSS tidy, so it only, you know, it minifies it and it only spits out what's unique. So, I mean, the files are usually pretty small, but the watering down the design part, I mean, I know that, you know, with Design Palette, I knew as I'm building this that in theory, someone could MySpace the shit out of their site. I know that they could do that.
MySpace is a verb.
Yes, and it's a verb for bad design.
Wait, you don't have image backloads, right? They can't like do sparkling stars.
No.
That's in the
Top
next
tip.
release. Wait for 2.0.
Okay.
Yeah, no animated GIF support yet. But I know, you know, that is a possibility. I know that. But as far as watering down the design, if you are releasing something for sale, it's not your design anymore. It's their design. And they've purchased it, and essentially, to a degree, they have purchased the right to do with it as they please. And that includes making it ugly.
But what you should note is in both those cases, though, the actual designing is still happening on the admin side, right? So people are logging in and using it. And the way I read that question was more about doing it on the front end, meaning in the actual design, changing things, right? The challenge that the WordPress core team has had, as I understand it, the challenge that a lot of folks have had is if they try and load up front end manipulation, they actually have to pull in more and more front end jQuery calls, libraries, etc. And so that stack of what you load on the front end, just so someone can do the things they normally can do in the back end on the front end, ends up getting actually quite heavy. And that's where you struggle to see, okay, what can you really bring? Which is why Velocity Page by Jaquith or Barley, which is at getbarley.com, they're doing it in a pretty lightweight way, which is a more helpful approach, right? But that's always the challenge when you have, I already have all this designed, but I have it designed in such a way that it's huge and heavy, and I didn't care because it was on the admin side. And now you're saying, well, but now you're changing who the end user is, you're changing how they're doing it, you're changing where they're doing it, and you're suddenly bringing a bunch of baggage with you versus guys who've designed a new approach and said, well, we just cleaned it up and made it different, right? And so I think in the long run, things like Velocity Page, things like Barley will help drive the discussion towards front-end manipulation. But when they're doing that, right now you're mostly focused on content, right? And you're focused a lot less on the front end of design. And I think that combination is a nice split where, because you're doing design hopefully once, right? So it's a nice split to say I log into the Genesis site and I use Design Palette Pro to set some things that hopefully I set once and I don't have to manipulate a lot. And then I use something like Velocity Page or Barley on the front end to get content in and manipulate without having to log in at all. And then there's a good chance that those people who are writing won't be actually screwing up design, right? Because what you intended to do is removed from, if you start making full visual design available on the front end, I think you start seeing different people create their own page. Like, oh, well, I'm working on this one page of a site. I do whatever I want, right? Which is akin to people using Word and Publisher in their offices for every one of those new flyers that was going around the office. And you're like, holy hell, this is ugly, right? we don't want to bring that to the digital age. That should just remain in the office and be done.
Yes. And just as a sideline, because there's some comments in the chat room about Genesis Extender. Genesis Extender is a very different product than Design Palette Pro, and I think there's some confusion because they do both allow you to customize your site. But if I were to, and correct me if you would say otherwise, but Design Palette Pro would be for the person who has no interest in touching code, does not want to look at code, and just wants an interface to make some design changes. That's all it is. You're not adding widgets. You're not moving.
You're not creating short codes.
Yeah.
You're not manipulating the code.
Yeah, we purposely made the decision to focus solely on design in the sense that it does not modify or handle in any way structural changes to the site. Part of those reasons is because there are a lot of unintended consequences when you add a widget area and now all your responsive design broke because you have an extra 300 pixels that showed up somewhere. But also there's a lot more security concerns when you start giving people the ability to add actual code that's now running, and it can, and I'm not saying Extender does. I'm saying that overall that opens more security concerns that need to be addressed, and that's a lot more development time. And if you can write code, you can write code. You don't need a front end tool to write. You just write it.
I disagree a little bit. Like, for me, that the Extender was a good bridging the gap to help me understand how I could hook in to different parts of the page. It just it gave me a little bit of extra bump before I was comfortable just opening up functions, PHP, and going. So I think there is there's definite role for it, but it's also a very different product. And
I think it's also a product that was designed at a different time. Right?
Yes, that is true.
And I think part of the dynamic was when Extender was created, there was no way to manipulate GUI in a Genesis child theme other than, say, Prose, I think. So there's no way to manipulate GUI, and it was, the answer to everything was a snippet of code you dropped in a functions file, which immediately created a barrier for everyone that wasn't comfortable writing code, right? At any level, right? And so even if you just had one line, you read the tutorial, and Brian Gardner and others had written great tutorials, but it's like one line, just drop it in. They're like, I don't know what to do with this, and you're like, well, okay, you can pay me to paste, but seriously, this is crazy. You could do, I don't want to do it, right? So it was built as that first step into, here, we'll do it. And if you're using a theme, they have a child theme that had all of what Extender was plus even more, right? And so the Extender was so that you could say, oh, I don't need to use their child theme, I can use one of your child themes, and I get this other capability. And it was solving all the gaps, right? So there was a gap on design, there was a gap on function, there was a gap on short codes, there was a gap on adding little widget areas that made it easy. So it was the Swiss Army tool, right? And you go, that's great. There is still a segment of the audience who you don't want to give the Swiss Army tool because they cut themselves, bleed, and die, right? And so you're like, no, I want to give you the ability to manipulate colors, right? I want to give you the ability to manipulate font size, or I want to give you certain space that you can work and nowhere else. That's where you start seeing, from a product perspective, over time, we will start seeing more and more specialties, right? And Design Palette Pro, because it's later in time, because you can draw those segments more clearly, you can say, this is for this segment of people that need this, and not worry about it. And so then you're left with other tools that historically did more because they were trying to solve all the segments, right? But that also makes it harder because you'll have people with those products that at one point, they only used one part of it, right? They may have only used the design part and never touched the rest of it because they still were uncomfortable with short code, right?
Got a question from Jenny for Norcross about a best social sharing plugin from a clean code perspective.
Roll your own. And I say that because every sharing plugin I've used to a degree did something I didn't want it to do. And I'll preface this, if you're already using Jetpack, go ahead with their sharing. It's one of the leanest ones out there. There's a couple others that, I'll see a new one every week that someone tweets out, and I'll look at it, I'm like, okay, it looks okay. That looks nice. The problem becomes that, the social services themselves, they tend to change how their functionality works. They'll change their, fortunately now most of them, they just update their JavaScript file, which you don't have to make any changes, but it used to be that they would update everything and you'd just be stuck there with nothing. But they load assets you don't want, they load them in places you don't want. They're loading all of their sharing scripts, which are notoriously the biggest hit on front-end site speed that I find on any site is the social. I had a client once where he's talking about site speed, and he's like, I'm on a dedicated host. He had everything else, and his site was still taking like 6 seconds. And I'm looking at the code, and I'm like, okay, this really isn't written that bad. A few little things, some transient stuff, a little bit of extra caching here and there, but I just disabled the social just to see, and it went from 6 seconds to 0.7 seconds.
Wow.
With no other changes made to the site.
Wow.
And because a lot of those things, they call, the important thing to look at is only load the services that make sense.
Not all of them.
If it's not going to dig, like...
Yeah, you load 40 and then you only put 3 icons on your site, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, like on Chris's site, if Chris had a Pinterest button, I would make fun of him.
Right.
Because what he is producing has no business being on Pinterest. And there's no
marketing. My audience doesn't actually leave my site to ever go to Pinterest or come from Pinterest.
Yeah, so don't put a social service on there because you think it might help. If the need isn't there, you can get away, most people don't need anything more than Twitter, Facebook, and they're the worst, speed-wise, LinkedIn and Google+. And LinkedIn if you're writing about more business-focused topics. Those 4, and maybe an email button, and you're good. The other part is the Facebook like box on the corner, showing your page and the people who like your page. That thing is garbage from Facebook. It's not anything about WordPress. It's if you have that box on there and you're showing 16 faces, there are 22 HTTP calls made for that box. 1 per person, plus some counts, plus some images. Yeah, it's terrible.
Wow.
And here's the worst part. The whole point of putting that box there was so that people would say, yeah, I like your page, and then what that would do is create better access on Facebook so that when you type something in Facebook, more people would see it, people who liked your page. But because Facebook has to generate revenue, Facebook has shifted their approach towards more ads, and the distribution of your content to people who even like your page has shrunk dramatically. So whereas I used to post something in my page part of Facebook, and I'd get 700 people that could view it, and now it says 60 people got to view it, right? Because Facebook is shifting towards we're going to earn money over ads. So if you still have that little Facebook box on your website somewhere, kill it now, and your site will get much faster immediately.
I've never looked at that box and wanted to do anything with. Either it shows that they have 112 fans, or it which tells me, okay, no one really cares about this, or the flip side is that they have a whole bunch of fans, but I'm like, okay, that's irrelevant to what I'm reading right now.
Yeah.
I'm posting a link over.
I thought she was going to her site to kill it.
Oh, it's good. Yeah, I've got to get that off my site.
I got to get it off my site right now.
Norcross said roll your own, and you might not know where to start with that. I posted a tutorial a couple of years ago, and I'll just warn you that the service calls are probably out of date, but that can at least give you a starting point to figure out how you might do that. Let us see. I missed several questions. One from Jan for you, Chris. Why do people find a $50 an hour plumber cheap and a $50 an hour designer or developer expensive, and how can we shift that attitude?
We don't ship that attitude. That's exactly right. A $50 plumber means you can go to the bathroom or you cannot go to the bathroom. A $50
indoors.
Indoors. A $50 designer is a nice to have, right? So the first thing you need to understand is there are Maslow. If you've never heard of Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, go search Google for it. But the reality is, and I get the point, and I'll circle back to the real point, but the reality is some things are needs and some things are wants. And if I have a website that I want to look prettier, that's a want. That's not a need. I mean, Wikipedia does great and it looks like crap. So at the end of the day, content is critical and ease of use is critical, but design is one of those things that is this will enhance you, this will be awesome, this will be great if you can afford it. There are some people who can't afford it or choose not to afford it. But your plumbing, that's a must-have. You've got to have plumbing. So pay your plumber. If you're a plumber and I can help you raise your rates, let me know. But for the core of the question, the reality is that more often than not, the reason why people start thinking that our prices are too high is because we have not yet made the case for why people ought to pay us. I have never negotiated with a mechanic, a lawyer that may keep me legal with the IRS, or anyone else who's going to do something critical for me. I've never negotiated down because I suddenly was like, let's see if I can save $20, because I don't want them cutting corners on my car. I don't want them cutting corners on my taxes. I don't want them doing anything that might lead me to either be in total disrepair and or in jail. Now, more often than not, we show up, and when we're talking about web and design, we show up and we look at my cute portfolio, I'm a great designer, give me all your money, right? And you're like, you haven't made the case. You've not built the trust. You've not been a trusted advisor. You've not added any kind of real help. Every time I have a conversation with a tax guy, I learn something, right? In fact, Norcross's wife, Bree, is also someone who's really good at bookkeeping, accounting, and those things. Every time I have a conversation with her, and I haven't paid her, right? Every time I have a conversation, she's adding value, right? She's talking about, well, maybe you want to think about this, or have you looked at these kind of products? And I'm like, oh, this is incredible. Thank you. When you develop that kind of trust, right? When you go, oh, you know what? She knows more than I do, so I'm going to let her solve these problems for me. When I know that she can solve these problems, when every conversation I have adds value, every time I interact, they're giving, then when they finally say, okay, but this I'm going to have to charge you for, right? I don't debate. So I have a plugin that Norcross is writing, and when Norcross says, yeah, I can do it, this is what it's going to cost, I don't say, well, now hold on a second, we're buddies. You know what, hold on a second, I gave you that advice that one time. I'm like, tell me your price, right? Sometimes he gives me a price that's too low, and I say, no, come on, give me the real price, right? And then I pay, because I don't want him shortchanging it. I don't want him, it on the back burner, and I know he adds value. I know he will do it faster than I will, and so let's just move on. Pay the money and move on. But that's because the people that I pay are people I trust, they're people I respect, and they're people who have constantly demonstrated they can add value. If a designer shows up to me, and in fact, I mentioned that I'm putting a new site up on Rainmaker. I know how to design a website. I can design a website. I have designed several websites. There are people that are better, and they're faster. And so when I contacted the Bournes, right, and I said, I love your work. I would love to work through your process. By the way, they have this totally automated process for emails and all this stuff, and I'm a huge fan of canned responses. So I paid money just so I could get access to all their canned responses, right? Because this is called business intelligence, right? But I said, I'll pay you. Just tell me what it is. And I don't negotiate with them. I don't nickel and dime them down. I feel like most of the time when the people I'm interacting with are asking for a premium price or a command price, and they're not justifying it. They're not actually winning me over. They're not suggesting how they add value. They're not modeling how they add value. Then I look at them too, and I go, that's just too expensive. You're not worth it. The people who are worth it, I'll pay them anything.
Yeah, so the point there is demonstrate your value. You don't just get to put a random number on your hourly rate and demand payment for that. You have to show that you're worth it.
Yeah, and on the other, being on the side of who, plenty of people have been like, well, how about this, and how, maybe how would do this much instead, done the nickel and diming. There's a group of people who, depending on who the type of folks you work with the most, there's going to be some clients who, especially when you get to the higher end type of clients, that what you're doing for them is a line item. That it's you can add, the numbers are, for all intents and purposes, it's a line item. It's on their budget, no big deal. When you're dealing with individuals, when you're dealing with small businesses, it's a much bigger line item. It could be the only $2,000 they have to spend, and they're really worried that, if something happens, because also most people, if they've been on the business side, not in the WordPress space, but I'm saying like they're a plumber, they're whatever they do, they've been burned by at least one web developer so far, at least one, where they started building it and they disappeared, or they built it and it was complete shit.
It looked like MySpace.
Or worked like MySpace. And so they're apprehensive because their experience with others has been iffy. So, one thing that I've always done is we try to do milestones. Smaller projects, it's usually 50-50, but on larger term projects, we're like, okay, we break down what we're going to do, and then we attach a price date and a price point for each of those things. So we start with a deposit, then okay, milestone 1 is going to be this, and this is what it's going to cost. 2, work out, depending on how big the project is how many milestones and what the prices work out to. And it gives them the feeling that, okay, if something goes wrong, I'm not going to be out my entire budget. I'm going to be out my deposit. If I find out that the developer isn't, can't do what they say they're going to do, they're not capable,
I can step out.
I can just walk away. And so there is something to be said for offering them a little bit of security, and not just taking offense to the fact that they're worried about their own money. I mean, the same people that will ask that, and I don't know that individual person, but they'll ask, I can't believe people are questioning me on my rates. They will then flip around and be like, I can't believe you're charging $50 for a plugin. Like, it should be free.
Yeah, I've definitely come across that. Well, shifting in a completely different direction, we've got a question from Greg for you, Norcross. Any ideas for a tattoo that represents the freedom the internet gives us to build our own business and work from? I can't think of anything alike. So, Greg, I don't know if you're contemplating a tattoo, but you got any ideas for him?
Well, let's see. What do I know about tattoos? Yeah, I got a few.
Hashtag bald eagle.
Yeah.
There you go.
Shit, I don't know. What I would actually do, and this is what I do with most of my tattoos.
But it's for, he said, so that we can build what? A plugin, build the business, build
just
what?
Our freedom, the freedom the internet gives us to
Go find
create.
a tattoo artist that you like their work, tell them your idea, and then let them be the professional and draw it. This is what I do with all of mine.
And if it costs $50, run.
Yeah, and or just get the word freedom in calligraphy right here on your neck. I find that that's truly incredible, and you'll get a certain set of customers very quickly.
Yeah,
and lose a certain set of customers very quickly.
When you don't feel that sentiment, like if you get hired full time or something, you just grow a beard out.
That's right. Or wear turtlenecks.
And when you go freelancing, shake. We did have a question earlier about another one on Design Palette Pro. Do you have plans to open that up to other frameworks than Genesis?
Offhand, no, because I'm not even sure what other frameworks it would be useful on. And it would involve reworking most of the plugin, because all of the plugin is tied to the markup that Genesis uses. So it would be a lot of refactoring, and frankly, I don't know of another framework community like Genesis that it would even be worth digging into.
+1 for that. Okay, question from Justin. How can the Genesis community innovate in terms of child themes available? I've shown many clients the Studio Press themes and third-party Genesis shop themes, but they don't like them compared to what they find on ThemeForest, etc. They really have trouble visualizing how it can be extended, additional page templates, etc. So, Justin, I'm not sure which perspective you're coming from, if you're more developer or designer, but my thought would be if they're seeing something that they like on ThemeForest and it's not a quality theme you want to work with, just rebuild it in Genesis.
Which I doubt it is.
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely rebuild it, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is I keep a list of sites that are awesome that use Genesis and they don't look like the standard child themes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I show people, they're like, that can't be Genesis. You're like, actually it is, right? So sometimes it's just exposure, right? People don't know what's possible. They don't know that you could do this. In fact, at one point I showed a client an actual implementation of one of the Genesis child themes, and I showed them the Genesis child theme demo, right? And those two were different enough that they were like, oh, I get it. Like just that, just saying, here's what it starts out with, here's how it ends with just a little bit of CSS and some graphics and new content. And the difference, they're like, oh, this is beautiful. I didn't even know you could do that, right? I thought my site had to look just like this. And you're like, no, it doesn't, right? So sometimes it's just a little bit of education. But if not, you can definitely build what you like to see over there. You can build it over here.
And I don't know anything about Justin's business. And please don't take anything I'm about to say as anything indictment on you. If you're just showing them child themes, you're not adding any value yet. The process should start at figuring out what they need and what sort of content they're going to be having and what sort of layout would make most sense. Again, you being the professional in the relationship, that should be more your call than theirs. Or at least you should help guide them towards
curate the themes.
Yeah, and then
them.
And then what you can do is I wouldn't even necessarily show the only way that I would just show someone some child themes is if they're a friend of mine and I'm doing them a favor and I don't have time to actually do any work. I'll be like, pick one of these and I'll just get it installed for you and maybe I'll tweak some CSS because they're a friend of mine. If they're a client and all I'm doing is showing them Genesis child themes, I'm not doing anything for them. I'm not doing anything that they can't do. I'm not saying you have to completely design wholesale new things every time, but what you should be able to do is by the time you're showing them existing designs, it should be, here's 2 examples based on what we've already discussed and what we've scoped out. Here's 2 examples of what I think from a very high level would be a good fit for you. Now, and if anything, take that child theme, turn it into a wireframe. Don't even show them, because as soon as they see they see the color blue and they see a certain font, that's in their head. They can't imagine it red with a new font. Show them a wireframe. This is where things are going to go. Because in their mind, they don't care that you're using Genesis. They really don't. So, kind of separate out, because if you start with something visual, that's all they're going to care about. And then they're going to go look at the Avedas on, which that theme needs to die with fire. They look at those themes on ThemeForest that offer 18 sliders and 117,000 shortcodes, and they think that's what they need because it looks nice. And that's not what they need, because they don't need 8 sliders. They probably don't need any, but they might need 1.
Very true. And there are lots of various wireframing tools out there if that's part of your process. But Rafal, who's over in the chat room and the designer over at Studio Press, he has a wireframing PSD kit over on his website.
Go get it now.
Yeah, it's great. It's just block components of text, banner sizes, search forms, again, that help you kind of map out what that site, what the components are that a client needs without cluttering it with color or really unimportant design aspects for that stage of the process.
And I know people were asking about that list that I had of Genesis themes or child themes.
They want the inside scoop, Chris.
Yeah, so I can tell you how I did it because it wasn't scientific. It was actually quite easy. So at Studio Press, there's a showcase tab or showcase link that shows a bunch of different sites, and they're constantly updating it. So every month I'll go there and look at some that are different than the norm, and I'll pull those links out. So I have my own subset of the showcase list. So if you want to see my list, or you want to see a list, go take a look at the showcase section of Studio Press, because they do a pretty good job of filling that up.
There you go. Secrets revealed right here on Office Hours.
Exactly right.
Got a few more minutes here to take some questions, and then Norcross has to grab a client call and
physically meet with a
Oh,
client.
yeah. I mean, how often is that you're?
Not often, especially ones that live in Oregon.
Yeah, his clients are just right up the beach.
Yeah.
And
Is that where the wife's kids like 2 miles north?
That's awesome.
And I'm gonna go walk along the shoreline and see if my glasses may be washed up overnight.
They're fine.
Yeah, I know. It was just wishful thinking.
Order new ones, have them shipped to Orange County by the time you get there.
That's right.
Warby Parker.
Well, the beautiful part is I don't have to drive anywhere, so it's all right. Okay, and Rafal's posting some great resources over in the chat room. And just as a reminder,
Such a swell guy.
He is a swell guy. I'll post some show notes here in a couple of days that have all these links included, as well as some of the things we talked about. Let's see if I missed a question. Guys, anything else just on your brain that you want to? No?
Just build. I mean, if you're wondering about development, just start building stuff, because everything I know how to do is because I broke something enough times to learn how to fix it, and then I learned how to not break it, and then I go forward. So if there's something, if you're like, oh, there's not a plugin that does this one thing I want, then that's a great idea, great way to build your first plugin.
Mm-hmm.
Is start it out, and don't be afraid, because it's going to be terrible code, because it's the first one you've done. Code I wrote 6 months ago I don't like if I haven't touched it, but to get rolling. I mean, because that's the only way you're going to learn is by actually writing it. It's not going to be one more tutorial is not going to make you a better developer, but one more publicly released code will.
Cool.
And on the business side, I'd say almost the exact opposite. Because that is perfect on how you learn development. What you don't want to do is you don't want to price wrong and learn on your own in business, right? So learn from other people's mistakes rather than having to create all your own. In coding, create your own mistakes because you learn the best from them. In business, if you create all your own mistakes, you will run out of cash before you ever get that chance to learn, right? You will just get past I'm broken, done, and this doesn't work. You also tend to take away the wrong lessons. Right? Like, oh, this product is a bad idea of a product. No, the way you sold it was a bad way to sell that product. The product may be just fine. So get help, right? Get coaching, get advisors, get other people who are just further along the journey. Build a whole rapport, a network of friends that are further than you in different areas of business. Get advice and help because you don't want to have to learn each of those mistakes on your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And over in the chat room discussing hipster mermaid tattoos. They represent freedom.
Isn't that also on the cover of Starbucks cups?
Yeah.
It's the siren. It's not a hipster mermaid.
It's a hipster.
It's a hipster.
Threw your glasses on.
It's a hipster mermaid.
It's a hipster mermaid. Yeah. So what was that? Was that Garner in there suggesting that it should be that? This is the symbol for freedom. You're like, this is the symbol this is the only symbol you know.
Justin, to go back to your comment about building custom themes and going through the wireframing process, but the clients are still wanting to see a little bit more, that might be a function of better defining or differently defining what your process is for creating those customized sites and setting the expectation that they're not going to get a fully functional working theme, until
it's done.
Until it's...
Like, you're not going to get a done theme when it's not done.
Yeah, so just kind of explaining how that works. And
it's helpful in the at the very beginning of the process, it's helpful to actually articulate all the steps in the process, all the milestones you were talking about, especially if you can tie payment to those milestones. But it's really helpful. I mean, we're in the middle of building a pool, right? And the guy that comes out says, this is our initial appointment, but we're going to come back with designs. That's the second appointment. The designs will not be the final designs. They'll just be designs so you can tell us if you like or don't like our idea. And then we're going to have formal blueprints written, right? And that's another one. Oh, by the way, you owe us money at that point. And then you're going to get it approved by people, and then we're going to start construction. And so you start this process of laying out the flow and the process, right? Again, I mentioned it's Born Creative. But the Borns do that, right? In their emails, they'll say, okay, this is how we're going to do this, then this is what we're going to do, then this. And when you do that early and help people understand the process, they become partners in the process. Right?
Yes.
It really helps. And they don't have these unreasonable expectations like, well, I talked to you once, where's my website? You're like, yeah, that's not how this works.
Yeah, and then also you don't get to, well, if you do get to, 3/4 through the project, you're like, I'm changing my mind on the typography or maybe this layout. then that's a scope change, right? And you charge accordingly for that, or communicate that it's a charge, and then they can make a decision whether or not it's that important to swap that stuff out. All right, well, we are going to wrap this up. I appreciate everybody over in the chat room for your participation. And
Thank you much.
Norcross, where can people find you online?
I'm just an ether. I don't really exist.
This is a hologram.
This is an avatar hologram.
Yeah, this is just
awesome.
some cardboard on a chair. No, I mean, I'm on Twitter. Lately I've been working so much I haven't existed anywhere, but I get on Twitter, occasionally and have fun there. Not very professional, but it is what it is. And Norcross.com, when I occasionally, once or twice a year, write something. And Design Palette Pro, GenesisDesignPalette.com has everything about the product that we've so eloquently discussed today.
Excellent, and a fun little live demo, so you can actually see what the product is.
And Bob Ross.
Yes, kudos to using the Bob Ross. You've won my heart. And Chris, what about you?
I have a blog over at chrislema.com, and I use the Twitter handle Chris Lema because I'm really original.
Also, hashtag blame Lema.
Oh, there's many hashtags.
Yeah, don't leave your computer up and open and unlocked with any around, and you walk away.
Yeah.
Well, that's just Lema security.
Yeah, that's been a really important thing to note here at Beach Press. Whenever you walk away from your laptop, shut down the lid. Otherwise, strange things start getting tweeted from your account.
Folks, this is not about if you're at Beach Press. Wherever you are, right? Whether you're at the library, Starbucks, or anywhere else, if you leave your phone unlocked, lying on a table, or your laptop open, logged in, and not password protected, open, you should expect far more than just someone logging into your Twitter account and saying, "I love Chris Lema," and oh, by the way, 10up is hiring. That's lightweight, right? If you leave that open, I'm changing if someone malicious, not me, right, can change the password to your emails, they can access your bank, they can go into everywhere, make changes to all sorts of stuff. Password protect your stuff. Close it down when you're not there. Don't leave your devices hanging out. That's my public service announcement.
There you go. Genesis Office Hours Security Edition. So, all right, guys. Appreciate your time. Thank you, guys. And for the rest of you, we will see you next Thursday. Bye.
Fantastic.